continue our celebrating of the life of Brian Scott Bellile with words from folk who knew him well and long and are willing to share with us some of their reflections at this time. We begin with Larry Bellile.
Brian is my brother. We spent most of our adult years living apart, primarily because of Brian's loss. His love of his work, his love for his family. Most recently, it's become difficult to differentiate one from the other. After college, I knew Brian mostly just by periodic visits throughout the country, wherever he may have been. Mostly long-distance telephone conversations. My wife never understood making long-distance calls to tell each other jokes. These past few days, I've had an opportunity to meet some of his friends. You have a beer? Listen to Brian's stories. I've seen so many people come together to share their love and their sorrow. It's quite a tribute. People who are a lot closer to him than I even was. There isn't anything that I can stand here and tell you about him that you don't already know. It's true you can judge a person's character by the company that it keeps. His had to be once in a lifetime. For Brian, Godspeed. It's been grand to have known him.
I would invite Carol Graham.
Hello, I'm Carol Brand. I'm Brian's sister-in-law and Kathy's sister. I have been asked by a very special young man to read this to you. This young man loved Brian and his family very much. No word can describe the feeling of pain inside. Really flowing as the ongoing time. We miss him so dearly, we miss him so much. But just sit back and you can feel his touch. The touch that he left on this beautiful world. The touch that he left on this beautiful girl. And when the thought comes to your mind, just sit back and think of the time that we had with this wonderful man. We can't go back, but then nobody can. There's a better place, which we don't know. But one thing for sure is that Brian will go. He will be healthy and young and free of heart. So the treasures he has will never part. He'll be there when you open your eyes. He'll be there to hear your cries. So don't be sad, it's just begun. And for all eternity, he's going to have fun. Thank you.
Right, my rollers.
Wow, there's a lot of you out there, aren't there? Sort of used to being behind the curtain doing this sort of thing. I hate funerals and want to not attend my own if it can be avoided. But it's a very well for every person to stop once in a while to think of what sort of a collection of mourners he is training for his final event. That quote comes from Robert T. Morris. Look around this room. Look at all these people. Know how far some have come to mourn the loss of a dear, dear friend, a great father, and a devoted husband. He was a prince. I've been lucky to know Brian and spent a lot of time with him for the last 9 years. The first time I met him was taken by his smile, his laid-back yet direct personality. I was coming in to take his job and become his boss. Most people would have been unpleasant and harsh. That wasn't Brian. He knew he wasn't suited to the position I was assuming and relinquished it so graciously. We developed an instant rapport. It was like I had known him for years, and our relationship became so comfortable so quickly. Part of this instant rapport was due to the fact that it reminded me of my own father. His characteristics and personalities were so similar. Brian had strengths and knowledge in areas of theater in which I was weak, just as I had management skills and bureaucratic patience that he lacked. But we were a team, and he helped build and anchor the ballet's production staff with his clear thoughts, his proven knowledge, and his direct questions. As our friendship grew, we began to finish each other's sentences and delight in each other's idiosyncrasies. But more importantly, we were family. When the lighting supervisor left, Brian and I interviewed new prospects and hired Stacy. She was talented, young, green, and very idealistic. Watching the two of them work together the first couple of years was like watching a seasoned old dog being nipped at by a young pup. Even though Brian was ready to bite back at times, he respected her and her talent and worked with her as she got her legs under her. He was a prince. It has been a pleasure to watch the two of them work together the last 6 years, each anticipating the other's needs, each caring about the other. We're a family. This was especially true when we were out on tour, our little production family of 6 or 7 technicians. We worked together, ate together, and even at times shared rooms. We knew too much about each other, what good families often do. And when the dancers would join us for overnight stays on the road, Brian's room would invariably be the center of action. If Brian hadn't lost his keys and could actually get into his room, or we hadn't stolen his keys from him. It was always a safe and fun place to be. One morning, after the dancers had an outrageously uncontrolled night in Galax, Virginia, Brian and I sat down for coffee in the morning. Dancers had just left on the bus back to Richmond. By this point in our relationship, we had become husband and wife. And he could tell I was upset. He smiled his little sort of smirk, sipped one of his 3 cups of coffee that he usually had in front of him, and said, "Yeah, they were loud, but at least no one fell off the 2nd-story balcony. That's where I drew the line." You see, when Anton, a former Russian dancer of ours, climbed over the balcony rail that night and was hanging by one hand, saying, "He's okay, I was with circus," Brian made him come back onto the landing. Brian told Anton he wasn't going to lose a dancer on his watch. Brian always knew how to make a bad picture seem brighter. He always found the good in the situation and the people. Brian was also a dad to the dancers. He protected them. If anyone made the dancers feel uncomfortable, whether it was a stagehand who made an off-color comment or a photographer or an observer, they were gone shortly thereafter. He prepared the stage the same way every time in each city so the dancers would always feel comfortable. He was once overheard telling a stagehand on tour, "That's exactly where those water bottles go. Everything has to be in the right place for my dancers." He loved you all so much. The words on this hearing, most invariably, were spoken after each opening night. He'd come up to me, big smile on his face, and he'd say, "We fooled them again," referring to getting through another opening night without a train wreck. My dad passed away 8 years ago, and I never wanted to feel that kind of pain again, and I'm feeling that kind of pain now. Brian touched us all with his smile, his infectious laugh, his great stories, his incredible character and disarming charm. Let me close with a quote that I believe is attributed to Taylor Forrester, a stagehand that passed away 7 years ago and was an associate of Brian and mine. I will forever think of Brian Bellile when I hear it. And come on, those of you that know, can join in with me. Who has more fun than we do? Damn few, and they're all dead. Brian, now that you've gone to a place where the good souls go and have more fun than most, do me one last favor. Go find my dad and spend some time together. We two will really hit it off.
Paul, Tyler?
As Julia Roberts said at the Academy Awards recently, you might want to just sit back and relax. This could take a while. With your help, I'll get through this. Brian Scott Bellile moved to Richmond. I've never called him that before, but it seems appropriate at this time. Brian Scott Bellile moved to Richmond originally over 22 years ago, in January of 1979. He came here from Wisconsin to work at the Virginia Museum Theater, which is now known as Theater Virginia. He was recommended for his job as a stage carpenter apprentice by Charlie Caldwell. Thanks so much, Charlie, for sending Brian our way. He was hired by Terry Bergler, the production manager at the theater. Brian got on a Greyhound bus in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and spent most of the next 2 days traveling the over 1,100 miles between there and here. It was a long trip, but knowing Brian, he probably made a few friends along the way. I met Brian for the very first time the day that he arrived here in Richmond. He came to Richmond with practically nothing. As the story goes, he had a duffel bag, Terry Bergler's phone number, and about $5.73. He called Terry, who picked him up and dropped him off at a tiny apartment in a building that we came to know as the Belmont Hotel, where 4 of us, Brian, Lee, and Mary Hook and I, spent the next 4 months living like refugees. Yes, believe it or not, one time that first season we did in fact walk to work through 2 feet of snow, although of course that just reminded Brian of Wisconsin. The times were tough, to be sure, but we loved our jobs, except for the incredibly tiny paychecks. And we loved the people we were working with. And without realizing it at the time, Brian had found a place where he would make his home. Now, Wisconsin's a very different place than Virginia, and sometimes Brian couldn't hide his amazement at some of our peculiar, strange southern ways. As far as he was concerned, the bars all closed way too early.